Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about how consoles changed RPG development. This comes from a question from I Love Sonic, who asked, I'm not sure if you've covered this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about the ways the console market changed RPG development over time. I know that most of your career focused on PC games, but I suspect that the introduction of home consoles didn't leave you all completely unaffected. Would love to know what you think as an industry veteran that worked through this shift. One of many shifts. I'll answer it. I thought it was an interesting question. I actually chewed on it for a while. I'm not a historian, so this is a very personal view of these changes. And yes, not just most of my work, but all of my work until 2014. So from 1981 until 2014, I was entirely on PC. Well, Fallout was also on the Mac. But consoles have been around as long as PCs. My first of either was an Atari VCS in 1977. And then I quickly, within a couple years, got an Atari 800. So my first two consoles and PC were both Ataris. And I started my first job in August of 1981. Oddly, doing art tools for what effectively was a console. It was more like a cable TV set-top box, but I just made the tools for it. I didn't actually work on the game. Anyway, let's talk about the 80s first, in respect to how RPGs affected, or how consoles affected RPG development. In the 80s, console RPGs were incredibly primitive. I'm talking stone knives and bearskins. Compared to computer RPGs at the time, they were very primitive. I mean, tabletop RPGs were really the way to go if you wanted really in-depth rules. But even computer RPGs had more complex rules than console RPGs. Because everything from graphics to the system mechanics and sound effects all had to be really, really simplified and reduced to fit in that very limited memory storage that it had, memory and storage and CPU bandwidth. I mean, it could not do much per cycle. The Atari VCS was really primitive. So I tended to play mostly computer role-playing games and tabletop role-playing games. To me, console RPGs were kind of like toys that you could kind of play. However, I will tell you one thing about that time. Console games came on cartridges, so the code couldn't be patched, which meant they had to be tight. They could not crash. They couldn't even have a lot of errors. And they were. These games, they were very simple, but they were also very well executed in the sense that there was very few errors in them. So let's move on to the 90s. My memory of the 90s is mostly my friends who were into consoles playing Japanese RPGs. And I didn't play those, and so I can't really comment. They seemed very, very different than what I was used to in Western RPGs. The characters were stylized a very particular way. The settings were dramatically different, and sometimes, from my point of view, not consistent. I remember watching Final Fantasy change from a fantasy game to maybe a tech game, but it was always both, or was it neither? Or, I don't know. I didn't really play them, and I just kind of watched other people playing them. There were some Western RPGs that hit the Nintendo and then the Super Nintendo. Bard's Tale, Wizardry, Pool of Radiance did that. But I was playing the PC versions exclusively. I thought they looked better, and I can tell you, if there was any VO and any music, and there was always music, it just sounded better on the PC. Then the 2000s hit, and a ton of RPGs came to consoles. They were often exclusive. There were a lot of publisher deals, so if you wanted to play a particular RPG, it was only on like Xbox or only on PlayStation, sometimes only on Nintendo. And then they came to PC later, sometimes not at all. But consoles demanded a very particular kind of interface and control change compared to their PC version. Mouse versus controller caused a lot of changes in how you'd use an interface. Where with the mouse, you could just point at something or drag it. Consoles tended to have you select something because you were using the directional pad or the thumbstick. So you'd go over something and then you'd click on it to select it. Also, consoles tended to have less memory and storage still compared to PCs, and this affected design a lot. Fonts are usually bigger on a console game because they were designed to be played from farther away. Your PC monitor was usually within 2 to 3 feet of your eyes, where usually your TV was 6 to 10 feet away from you. So that was a big thing. Another thing were checkpoint saves. Because consoles tended to have limited storage, checkpoint saves were really common. And if you remember that, that's where you couldn't save anywhere. You had to get to a particular spot, or maybe you had to go back to a town, and then you could save. Where most computer RPGs just let you save anywhere. Maybe you didn't get to save in the middle of combat. Sometimes you did, though. But usually you could just save where you were and then reload and start from that. All of this changed in 2002, and I remember this. Morrowind came out on the Xbox. It was an open-world Western RPG that felt like it had none of the limitations of previous console games. It was a PC game playing on an Xbox. It stunned me when it came out because I remember thinking, this is it. Not so much because of what the game was, but what it represented, which was from now on, there's going to be a lot more parity between these two things. And another big change is by the mid-2000s with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, both of those consoles got digital storefronts, meaning people were now buying games and downloading them onto their console directly. This meant it was also easy to patch them. And suddenly, maybe this was a coincidence, maybe it wasn't, but suddenly console games seemed to ship with bugs in a way they had never shipped with bugs before. They weren't as tight. Then by the 2010s and 2020s, it felt like parity had been established and reached between PCs and consoles. You sometimes still feel the limitation of one affect the other. Interfaces, on people tend to play with a mouse on PC and tend to play with a controller on a console. So interfaces were designed with that in mind. But I still remember the big change for me happened in the mid-2010s. I bought a PC RPG and it ran so poorly on my home rig, which wasn't top of the line, which was probably one down from top of the line, in terms of CPU and GPU. But that game ran really slow. I remember dropping into single frame FPS, and it crashed in a couple places. It was an open world RPG, but I was having a lot of trouble with it. I ended up buying a console version. I bought the Xbox version, I think it was, and it ran super smooth. The frame rate was pretty consistent, no crashes whatsoever. In fact, I went to the same town that on my PC would crash. There was one road going into the town. There were lots of roads going into town, but one road in particular, if I went down that road, I would crash. Didn't happen on the Xbox. I ended up giving the PC version to a coworker. So by that time, by the late 2010s, I was pretty much a console RPG convert, and I played most of my games at home on a console. And the big reason for that is once I started playing that one, I realized after sitting all day at work doing stuff with RPGs on a computer at a desk, I liked going home and sitting on a couch and with a controller in my hand and playing on my really big TV. So by the late 2010s, I'd say I was pretty much a console RPG player. And I think now everything's kind of in parity. The last big RPG I played, I think it was visually identical between its console and PC versions, and I think that's just how things are going to be going forward. Anyway, I love Sonic. I hope that answered your question.